Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I'm Talha.
I'm Josh.
I'm Faryal.
I'm Amara.
And I'm Hassan. Today's video is on acts, regulations, and bylaws in engineering. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our video.
In this presentation, we're going to cover three sections of the Professional Engineers Act that we believe are most important for future professional engineers to know. The sections covered are confidentiality, offenses and penalties, and offenses involving falsity. The first section I'll be going over is confidentiality. Subsection 1 itself is confidentiality. Every person conducting this act and anyone making a review under Section 26 or 33 must remain secretive on anything they come across at their work and cannot discuss it with an outside entity unless it's required by the bylaws, the Architects Act, their counsel, or with consent of the person who owns that information. However, this section does not apply to information that is deemed to be a risk or harm to any person, property, or welfare. Subsection 2 is to protect people who fall under subsection 1. They are not required to give testimony or produce any book, record, document, or thing obtained in their duties, employment, examination, review, or investigation except proceedings under this Act or the Architects Act. Subsection 3 describes the penalties and offenses for breaching subsection 1, which will be discussed in detail later on. And finally, subsection 4 enforces a time limitation, stating that any offenses committed or allegedly committed more than 2 years in the past will not be investigated any further.
For Section 40 of the Professional Engineers Act, which is offenses and penalties, subsection 1 is offenses relating to the practice of professional engineering, and states that any person who violates Section 12, which is when license or certificates are required, is guilty of an offense and is liable to a fine. Subsection 2 is offenses related to the use of the term professional engineer, and states that any person who doesn't have a license and uses the title professional engineer or insinuates the practice of professional engineering is guilty of an offense and liable to a fine. Subsection 3 are offenses related to the services of professional engineers, and states that any person who is not acting under a certificate of authorization and uses a term or seal to lead to the belief that the person is providing services of professional engineering is guilty of an offense and is liable to the fine. The use of the term licensed engineer technologist or engineering intern are also offenses and liable to a fine. Subsection 4 covers offenses relating to the obstruction of investigation, which means that if you obstruct a person appointed to make an investigation, you are guilty of an offense and liable to a fine.
Subsections 5 and 6 state that any director or partner that authorize, permit, or acquiesce in the offense is guilty and liable to a fine. This essentially means that any party that enables you in some way to commit an offense is also guilty. Subsection 7 states that if the offense was committed over 2 years ago, there will be no proceedings to determine the verdict of the accused party. Subsection 8 states that subsection 2, offenses relating to the use of term professional engineer, does not apply to the holder of a limited license who uses a term, title, or description authorized or permitted by the regulations.
For offenses involving falsity, there are three subsections, which are as the following. Subsection 1 states, anyone who makes or issues a false license, certificate, temporary license, provincial license, limited license, or document with respect to registration is considered guilty of an offense and on conviction can receive a fine. Subsection 2 states, every person who willfully obtains the issuance of any license or certificate under this act by knowingly making a false representation or declaration or by making a fraudulent representation or declaration, either orally or in writing, is guilty of an offense and on conviction is liable to a fine no more than $10,000. And every person aiding and assisting such person is guilty of an offense and on conviction is liable to the same fines. Subsection 3 states, no proceeding shall be commenced in respect of an offense under subsection 1 or 2 after the expiration of 2 years after the date on which the offense was or is alleged to have been committed.
To summarize, Act 38 is about confidentiality and how engineers must keep company work and ideas private. Act 40 is about offenses and penalties relating to the misrepresentation of one's title, including professional engineer, engineering intern, and licensed engineering technologist. And finally, Act 41, offenses involving falsity, says that nobody can falsify a license or certificate pertaining to the engineering profession.
So, as a first year engineering student, why should you care about these acts? Specifically for the confidentiality section, it can be used to protect your own work. Let's say a new employee gets hired at your company, sees the company's secrets, which is something you've dedicated your entire life working on, copies it all down and shares it to the public. Without these sections, there will be no penalties for them. It would unmotivate the entire industry as any innovation could be robbed in the blink of an eye and your hard work is gone down the drain. The penalties are defined in subsection 3. So if a person is convicted of breaching confidentiality, they can be fined up to $10,000 just from the PEO's regulations. This does not mean it's only $10,000. The legal fees could be much more depending on the damage done to the company and what they can and likely will sue you for. A case that was recently resolved of breaching confidentiality is Tesla versus Dr. Guangxi Chao, with the most recent being on May 14th of this year. Chow worked at Tesla for about 2 years, after which he took a position at X Motors. Tesla accused Chow of taking their autopilot code, which is a state-of-the-art, industry-leading AI responsible for their self-driving cars. As a US company, he was sued under US laws, but the same concepts apply in Canada as well. Tesla sued Chow under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, the California Uniform Trade Secrets Act, and for breaching non-disclosure agreements when he uploaded data related to autopilot onto his iCloud. If it was under Canadian law, as an engineer, he would have been fined under subsection 3 of confidentiality, along with some other penalties. This isn't the first employee that Tesla had to sue for a breach of confidentiality. Alex Khatalov put code related to Tesla's warp drive software, which is internal software relating to Tesla's business acts, onto his Dropbox. Tesla is suing him under the same acts that Chow had been convicted of. Again, if it was in Canada, Mr. Khatalov would be fined under the confidentiality section. These are just two examples from a company's perspective, but these laws are protecting the employees at the company too. All their years of hard work could have been leaked at a moment's notice if these regulations were not put in place, and would have been a disincentive for employees, as Tesla's autopilot can be looked at as this generation's engineering marvel.
For Section 40 of the Professional Engineers Act, the first offense of any subsection can lead to penalties of $10,000 to $25,000. Any subsequent offenses can be liable to fines of up to $50,000, but there are cases where the fines have been more than this. If you authorize, permit, or acquiesce a guilty party, you are liable for up to $50,000 in fines. Adding a term like engineering intern into your resume without the proper accreditation can cause a fine of up to $25,000. The reason these penalties are so important is not only for the money lost, but also for the impact these decisions have on the company and all those involved. If other people are faking their licenses and certificates, it could ruin the reputation of professional engineers in the public eye, as their work won't reach the standards that PEOs are held to. Also, faking accreditation can take away opportunities from people who actually deserve it and create an unfair advantage.
Breaking Section 40 of PEO Acts has not only legal consequences, but can also impact citizens. In 2020, a man named Robin S. Rice misrepresented himself as a professional engineer in the workplace. This led to him getting fined $56,000. He got caught because the company noticed errors in his work. Any errors in an engineer's work can always put people at risk because the errors lead to not operating correctly. This is just one example of the other possible impacts that breaking Section 40 can have. Similarly to the first situation mentioned, another man in Ontario named Kevin Kirk Smith used the title P-Eng and forged a license certificate with the title on it, which resulted in him receiving a fine of around $15,000. In this situation, employers reported Kevin to the PEO. Had they not, they may have also been liable to fines. Many people who earn their engineering degree move out of the province or even the country, but similar laws are in action all around the world in the United States. For example, John Britz was charged with scheming to defraud and criminal use of personal identification for impersonating the Lakeland mayor in an email to push through his application, and falsifying his college transcripts and registrar documents. He was placed in jail in 2019 and is still in prison today. He was fined a large portion of his salary, which was around $800,000 accumulated over 6 years. His work in an electric company thankfully did not put any risk to the city, but could have been disastrous to the city of Lakeland, Florida.
Not following Act 41, offenses involving falsity can result in severe consequences and can lead you to getting fined for up to $10,000. As a first-year engineering student, you should care about these acts as they will significantly impact your future. For offenses involving falsity specifically, this helps make sure everyone is following the process and no one is getting cheated. Imagine working so hard to get your PEng license, but then finding out someone got theirs without putting in any effort. It also makes sure that the person holding the license is certified to do the work, especially since if someone has a fake license, they wouldn't have the knowledge to do the specific work and could potentially put the customers' lives in danger. Here I have two examples of some people violating Act 41. The first example is about a 51-year-old man who has been charged with using fake credentials to get hired as a professional engineer by at least 3 firms, and this was stated by the Licensing and Regulations Committee in his city. Furthermore, the grand jury returned a 3-count indictment charging Lawrence D. Novosky with 1 count of practicing without a license and 2 counts of counterfeiting a public seal. According to the State Board for Professional Engineers, a part of the Labor Department's Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing that investigated Lawrence was released on his own recognizance and ordered not to work at any engineering firm. The board's investigation found that Lawrence, an electrician with no education or training in engineering, was used as a troubleshooter in the field and had testified as an expert witness in court cases stemming from electrical fires. He was charged with practicing without a license between May and November, but might have worked as a professional engineer for as long as 5 years. The board found that Lawrence supplied employers with a phony Johns Hopkins University transcript that he ordered over the internet, and fake licensing documents that contained an authentic state seal and authentic professional engineer's license number. That number belonged to a person who was last licensed in 1998. The second example is about 2 men named Ruben Gutierrez and Wilfredo Rodriguez, who were hit with 487 counts in a complaint alleging they spent years running a scam that has potentially left hundreds of homeowners across Southern California with homes that may not be structurally sound. Huntington Beach resident Ruben Gutierrez, 43 years old, and Wilfredo Rodriguez, 46-year-old, of Downey, each faced numerous counts of forgery, identity theft, and grand theft in a scheme involving falsified documents and fraudulent engineering services. Neither Rodriguez nor Gutierrez were licensed architects or civil engineers. Investigators estimate that there were more than 700 residential and commercial properties where fraud allegedly occurred in more than 50 cities in Southern California. If convicted as charged, Rodriguez faces up to 152 years in state prison, while Gutierrez faces a possible maximum sentence of 105 years in prison. Based on these 2 examples, we can see they violated many parts of Act 41 and face the consequences. Now, as first years, you should all care because you guys are coming into university and you want to make good habits. If you start off creating bad habits by cheating and doing academic plagiarism, this could also keep going until your graduation and then lead you to committing crimes in the real world that violate Act 41. This could ultimately end you up like these guys, and I'm sure you guys don't want that.
In conclusion, these acts are very important to understand because the consequences for breaking these can result in fines and even jail time. Act 38, confidentiality, is important for first years to be aware of because if they are working at a company for a co-op or internship, they cannot share any of the company's work or ideas to others. Act 40, offenses and penalties, is crucial to understand in first year because when applying for co-ops or internships, they must be aware that they cannot misrepresent themselves with a title such as professional engineer. And finally, Act 41, offenses involving falsity, is important for first years because they must make sure that when applying for their co-op or internship, they do not falsify any licenses or certificates, or else they could be liable to a fine. That is why these 3 acts are very important for engineers and people studying to become engineers to understand.
Now you know about the acts and their consequences and why you should care about them. Let's take a look at how these acts play out in a few scenarios.
The following video is a part of Intel's training program.
This is Bob. He works at Intel as a software engineer. Intel sent out an internal email to all employees that they're signing with Nike as they are developing shoes with computer chips inside. These computer chips will track steps, have a built-in GPS system, almost like an Apple Watch on your feet. Bob's boss, Gary, emphasizes the importance that this must stay confidential and that all employees must sign a non-disclosure agreement. However, Bob gets very excited and tells his athletic friend as he thinks it can't hurt to tell one person. Later that day, his friend tweets out about how he can't wait for this product to be on the market. Bob goes to work the next day and is immediately fired and handed a lawsuit. What do you think Bob did wrong?
The Twitter page of Nike was tagged in many tweets about this collaboration, and they were infuriated. Through some research, the rumor was traced back to Bob's friend, and his friendship with Bob was discovered through Facebook. Bob is now facing consequences for breaching Section 38 of the Professional Engineers Act. The Act states that information must stay confidential unless otherwise noted. Under the Act, he is fined the maximum of $10,000 from the POs, along with further consequences for breaking the NDA. Bob could have avoided this catastrophe by keeping his mouth shut and not telling anybody about the collaboration and honoring Section 38 and the NDA.
Janice is the head of the electrical engineering department at Intel. She has been working long hours and needs more employees to help with the workload. She is in charge of the hiring process and overlooks all applications. After hours of looking through applications, one catches her eye. This applicant, John, has all the qualifications. He is a professional engineer and she decides to call him in for an interview. During the interview, Janice realizes that John has all the qualifications and experience. However, he is not a professional engineer, nor does he have a proper education. John begs her to hire him and Janice does with the condition that he will be paid less and he needs to keep quiet. John manages to be an imposter at Intel for 7 months. Intel was working on the computer chips for the new Nike shoes and John signed off on one of the pieces. The prototype shoes start overheating, start smoking, and cause first-degree burns on the test subject's feet. Intel is infuriated and decides to investigate. They notice that the engineer's seal of approval was stamped by John and the company does some firing and suing. Who do you think is responsible and who should Intel fire?
After Intel noticed John signed off, they decided to do a background check as this mistake was juvenile and the design should have never been approved. The background check revealed that John is not a PEO and his credentials are fake. They charged him a max fine of $10,000 under Section 41 of the Professional Engineers Act for obtaining fake license, and he was immediately fired. After further investigation, they found out that Janice hired John, knowing he was not a PEO. She breached Section 40 of the Professional Engineers Act for knowingly hiring a fraud and was fined $50,000 along with other fines from the company. Both John and Janice were in the wrong. Janice should never have hired a fraud and John should have worked for his PN rather than creating a fake license. This concludes the training video. We hope you now realize the severity of the consequences one can face for breaching the Professional Engineers Act, and you now know what is right and wrong.